special National Park Authority meeting on the property item. Just before we get going, the live stream is, I think, started or about to start, so let's be aware of that. People can look in if they want to. The emergency evacuation procedure is as per usual. If the alarm goes off, it's out onto the lawn at the front in orderly fashion. Do we have apologies for absence?
Yes, we've got apologies from Patrick. Apologies from Patrick James, Janet Waggett, Paul McInnes, and Luke Holmes.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more? I think that just about accounts for us all. I don't think who's missing. It's I think it was A from Cleveland. Have we got him yet?
And Abida. He said his apologies.
Yeah.
And Abida.
Abida. That's who I was just trying to count up the apologies and thinking who was missing. Okay. So, there's public question time at item 4. Do we have any public questions notified to us? No. Item 5, it's the reminder to declare your interests, should you have them, and there's a sheet of paper to note that down. It makes it easier for the minute taking. George.
I don't have actually to make this statement, but given that I made it in previous meetings when this matter was discussed, I thought I would highlight again that I am a North Yorkshire councillor representing Helmsley.
Thank you. I don't think by necessity North Yorkshire councillors have to declare an interest, but thank you for doing that, George, just so others can feel it.
Particularly, I represent the fact that I represent Helmsley is what I want to highlight.
Well, I don't know whether I
Speak.
I don't know if I have to declare because I was on the planning committee that decided it. I don't know, but I will. There you go.
Thanks. But again, if you have declared an interest, it's just handy if you make a note of it so people see you declare an interest and then they wonder what it's all about. So if you have done, please make a note of that so we can record it in the minutes. So, item 6 is exclusion of the public for the private parts of the agenda. Can I have your agreement to do that when the time comes?
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Can we make it clear why there is an exclusion to the public for this part of the agenda?
Sure.
Yeah, so there are 3 appendices that are within the pack that members receive that are they're considered as private business because they 2 of which contain commercially sensitive information. But the 3rd of which is a historical report that we don't have permission to publish externally.
Does that mean that at some point in the future this information will no longer be sensitive and therefore could become public?
I believe that's the case, George, yes, in future.
Do we know roughly when that will be?
I can't put a timeline on that, I'm afraid.
Okay, so if there's no more discussion on the matter, we're happy to resolve that we go into private session when the time comes. Is anybody against that? No.
I am against the fact that we don't have a timeline when some of the information here is going to be made public, and I'm also questioning why some of the information in the first appendix, particularly in the first paragraph, should not be made public today.
Okay, so you're recording a vote against. Yeah, no, that's fine. I think still, if George is voting against, could I just have a show of hands, please, in favour of that resolution, just to be clear?
Which paragraph is it?
I don't know what your problem.
What paragraph? What does it say?
The first paragraph in the first appendix that is private, which obviously I don't want to talk about it, but the first paragraph in the first appendix, I think that information there could be disclosed today because it is not commercially sensitive.
Okay, we'll get ourselves settled down to do this. Just before we go back to doing the vote, to be sure. But what's really important to me is to make sure that all members feel comfortable with all the information that they need to have to make a decision. It's really important that we're open and clear and honest and fair. But it's really difficult for us to do our business if all the time we want to ask a question, we're having to stop and saying, can I say this or can I not say this? And so I think probably, on balance, it's most important that members are able to have those conversations without compromising our ability to do business and to deal with business sensitive pricing and stuff like that. And so I think we need to have that conversation, and then I think probably after that we can be sure or to trust officers to make sure that we release as much of the information at the time as is possible. But it's really difficult for us to do our business when we're having to ask, can we ask the question before we even ask the question? So I think the thing to do is to err on the side of caution, to deal with the private business as set out, and then we can decide how much of that and as much as is ever possible at this time can be put into the public domain at this time. So that's my plea to members for the sake of getting on and doing the job that we're here for. So we have two sets of agenda, the one which is printed in private session at 7A and the public agenda for the time being. And my suggestion is that we take a vote on whether we deal with those as set out now, and then we can make a judgment when we've had those discussions as to how much of that can be in the public domain at this time. So, just to go back and be clear, as item 6, it's exclusion of the public to deal with the private business set out at 7A. I'm going to move that from the chair. Is there a seconder for that proposal? Malcolm? So can we have a show of hands in favour of taking that, given what I've just said? Oh, you're right, Richard. So,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, Chair.
And all those against?
That's 1, Chair, that's carried.
And abstentions, please? 2.
2 abstentions. That's carried, Chair.
Lovely. Thank you. So that's dealt with item 6, that we have agreed to exclude the public when we deal with the private business at 7A as set out, and we'll deal with, I say, how much of that can be released after we've had the discussion. So, before we get on to item 7, it was my plan. There's a lot of information in here. The property working group, although it doesn't make decisions, has been quite close to the journey that we've been on. But I'm also very much aware that some people are not on property working group, and an awful lot of stuff has gone on in the last, I think, nearly 5 years since we started talking about this. And so I don't intend to rush. I intend to go through the presentations. There's a lot of assumptions which are carefully made, but not easily understood. And so I think we'll probably have a break or 2 breaks going through the process, depending on how we get on, so that members can just have time to. It's only a single item agenda, and I don't want you to feel that you've got marched along without fully understanding or being able to ask the stupid questions, which are not stupid questions. So, with that caveat, we'll deal with item 7, which is the relocation of the Norfolk Moors National Park Authority to Rickle Drive, final business case. And I've got a paper agenda, which I'm not used to these days, but I think it's Tom that's going to start.
Yeah, it is indeed me. Morning, members. I checked some information earlier and found out today is Blue Monday, apparently the most depressing day of the year. But hopefully today's discussion will be lively and positive. So we've reached a major point in the journey relating to the authority's property requirements, i.e. consideration of a final business case and an appendices relating to the National Park Authority's office accommodation. I fully recognise this is a significant and consequential decision for members that comes on the back of almost 5 years of discussion and deliberation between officers and members, in which we've involved members quite closely in all of that. But I'm equally mindful that we've got some new members and some who haven't been on that journey. And so it is appropriate, as you say, Chair, to ensure that we spend the time going through that as thoroughly as possible. So just to start a little bit, Judy, if you can move on, please. Am I working it? There we go. So just to kind of set the scene in terms of how we're gonna structure this, you'll see that the business case is laid out according to a framework, and we've used the central government framework, known as the 5-case model, as the loosely as the framework to present the business case, as we see that as being the most appropriate basis for presenting the information that is germane to the decision that we're asking members to take. And so we'll go through that in each of those sections. I'll start with a little bit of background before handing over to Helen and Pete, respectively, to pick up the strategic case, which covers the rationale for change. Why are we asking members to make a decision around this investment? The economic case, which looks not just at the financial aspects, but also the wider socioeconomic and environmental implications of the decision. The commercial and management case that deal with the procurement exercise and how we'll manage the project going forward. And then finally, the financial case, which deals with financial viability and affordability. So we'll take each of those sections in turn. I just need to click on again, Simon, thanks. There is some information that's contained in private appendices, which we'll deal with under item 8. So once we've reached the end of section 5 in our presentation, we'll then look to go into private business to consider the information in those appendices, which deals with part of section 4 and most of section 6 in the business case, before coming back into public business to deal with next bullet, the conclusion, any further debate and discussion from members, and the recommendation. What I'd ask is, as we go through each section, if members could let officers do the presentation as best as possible, and then we'll deal with kind of questions at the end of each little bit of presentation from either myself, Helen, or Pete, if that makes sense. So next slide. So we're going to move on to section 2, which is the background. And just before I kind of set that out, I want to just sort of preface that by saying that when I arrived as chief executive in September 2020, I think one thing that was apparent to me as I spent a little bit of time getting to understand the authority is that it was evident that we'd muddled through in terms of our office accommodation for many years. For what might seem to be laudable reasons, which was to ensure that investment that we received from different sources was prioritised in delivery within the national park. However, there comes a point at which it's no longer possible to just muddle through, and the cracks are literally becoming more evident and visible the more time that we spend in this building. And so we reached a point where significant investment must be made to fix the roof and beyond. We can't continue as an organisation just to muddle through in terms of our property. The other thing I'd say as well is that this is also about looking to the future. the kind of organisation that we're seeking to become, the ambition that we've got for the organisation, and making sure that we've got a working environment that's fit for purpose and sets us up to succeed for the next 40 years. So just a little bit of background to the review. The property review was initiated in 2021 in a paper that was brought to the National Park Authority board meeting at that time, and that set out a scope for the review of property, which is laid out there and is laid out in the report, the business case as well, and to support officers in considering and deliberating the options, helping to narrow those options down and take options forward. Under the National Park Authority, a property working group was set up, which comprised around about 10 members that worked alongside officers over the course of that almost 5-year period. And you can see the terms of reference for the property working group are set out in Appendix 1 of the pack. One of the first tasks was to narrow down the options and consider a long list of options, taking account of the pros and cons of those different options. And you can see that those are set out to some extent within Section 2, the background of the business case, but also in more detail in Appendix 3, which is drawn from one of the early papers that was presented to members during 2021 that looked at the pros and cons of different options. And you can see within that why a number of options that we considered in the early days, like developing our national park centres as accommodation for officers, looking beyond Helmsley, including at current or former council premises, why a number of those options were ruled at the time, ultimately narrowing us down to options that were based either on leasing or renting new purpose-built, leasing or owning new purpose-built accommodation, or seeking to redevelop the old vicarage, our current offices, in order to ensure that it's fit for purpose for the next 40 years. Members I think very quickly reached a conclusion back in 2021, 2022, that the cost benefit of owning our own offices outright, as opposed to leasing from a developer, was probably more cost effective, and therefore that option was eliminated as part of the shortlisting process. In other words, we've kind of got two broad options that are set out in more detail, and Helen will pick those up as we go into section 3 of the paper, but operating under a steer from members that we should explore the option of developing new office premises, which led us in September 2023 to acquire land at Rickle Drive to give us the option to develop at that stage an integrated office and depot building, which we took to North Yorkshire Council for planning permission initially in 2024, granted in January 2025. And then I guess the final stage of the journey there is latterly the decision that members took in the summer of last year to decouple the depot elements of the integrated design and repurpose the old print works, which construction of which is underway currently. That, I think, brings us to the end of section 2, which is the discussion around the background for the property project and the work of the property working group. I think, Chair, I'll pause there before handing over to Helen to pick up section 3 and the strategic case, and just invite any questions from members around the background to the property review.
Thanks, Tom. So, as I say, we've only got this one item, so I tend to go as slowly as you want to do. Are there any questions on the background where we've come to at this time? George.
Thank you, Chair. Tom, thank you for the presentation and the background. Do you agree with me that the financial situation that the authority faces at the moment is very different to 2020 when you came on board, and 2021 when the project about changing the location of the headquarters of the national authority has significantly changed, particularly given what Pete mentioned in the last public meeting of the authority, that if we that we might be facing risk of managed decline over the coming years, and therefore, as a result of that, would you feel that maybe some of the decisions that were made at the time might not be appropriate to the financial situation that the authority faces at the moment?
So I think that the last part is a question for members to consider. I think in terms of the financial outlook for the National Park Authority, that has evolved, but I don't think it's evolved in a way that's inconsistent with the trajectory that we would have seen back in 2021, which was declining core grant income from DEFRA and growing external project income from other sources. And when I look at the evolution of the authority and the trajectory for growth that we've seen from 2021, we've continued to grow our turnover as an organisation and ultimately grow our portfolio of work. Clearly, though, I would recognise that the financial implications and challenges around core grant settlement as being a key source of revenue are ones that members will need to weigh as part of the balance in any decision. Recognising that at the moment we don't have a settlement for the 2026-2029 financial period, we may well get some information in due course. But ultimately, we feel members have got to make a decision based on what they understand and what they know in the here and now. So I think I recognise that there's been evolution, and I recognise that is an issue that members will need to weigh in terms of their decision making. But I equally think we're not an organisation that's looking to manage decline. We're an organisation that's looking to grow and progress.
The term managed decline that Pete mentioned in the last meeting and also in FRASC, was that a risk facing the authority back in 2021? And was it a smaller risk, a bigger risk than now that we might be facing a managed decline?
So I think as this picks up sort of my report in the last public meeting, as you mentioned, actually members will be aware that managed decline has been in the presentation for quite some time now strategically. And I think actually managed decline is an inevitability if you don't challenge yourselves to grow. What I would say is DEFRA uncertainty and DEFRA grant uncertainty isn't new. It's not new this year. In fact, we've faced into that since probably about 2010. And certainly since the 3-year period where we had increases, we've had freezes ever since, in sort of certainly in revenue grants. So facing into those headwinds, I don't think is anything new. I don't think that's resolving itself anytime soon either in terms of potentially that year-to-year uncertainty. Certainly when you look at central government, and I think year-to-year we have to address that. What I would say strategically, before 2020 and since 2020, we've constructively looked all the time at being ambitious about how we raise sort of finance and income and resources from other areas other than DEFRA grants to combat that. And I think that strategy has shown that we've grown. I think I quite often present a graph that shows kind of our overall delivery, which has gone up and up and up over time, despite that challenge that we face with DEFRA grant. So I think probably our proven track record is good. I think the slide that I show with managed decline on it is just if we don't continue to be ambitious and look for other revenue sources and other ways of delivering through other avenues other than DEFRA funding, that is maybe the default option that we do see in other areas. But I think, as Tom reiterated, that's not the ambition of the authority, and I think our track record so far has shown that. And DEFRA grant uncertainty will continue, and that is something for members to consider in the context of today.
Thank you. So the risk is still there about the managed decline?
It will always be sort of a default if we don't grow, but I think our track record speaks for itself. But DEFRA grant uncertainty will remain, and members need to consider that alongside the papers today.
Thank you. Christine?
I just wanted to make a general point at this stage. Obviously, we haven't gotten into the depths of the business case yet, but through the beginning part of the report, it references several times having debated various issues with members. And I'd just like, going forward, perhaps for the authority in such documents to make it really clear what was worked through with the working group, which is a particular group of members, and what was discussed in a wider, more open forum with all members, because there may be differences of opinion and views. So it just reads a bit confusingly in that sense from the perspective of someone who's not a member of the working group.
Sure. I think in the agenda that there's a list of decisions made by the full authority. And so the working group wasn't really constituted to have any decision-making powers at all. It was just for those members that were interested and wanted to be close to the numbers and the detail, to be involved with that to make it easier. But we specifically made sure along that journey that the actual any decisions, so to speak, to be banked along the way came to authority. And I think there's a list of authority decisions which we made, which is quite extensive. And so the working group is purely there to help officers be and to be closer to that journey, and that was a specific decision. All formal decisions to this point have been made at full authority, and I think for the journey, I think for me the interesting part here is that although to start with, clearly we as an authority were challenged to say our office hasn't been invested in, something has to be done. And so I personally didn't particularly welcome that challenge, but as as an authority looking after our staff and delivering our purposes, of course that's what we have to do. And coming down this journey, I think it made sense in the end that we set down two options. One was to reinvest in this building, and one was to move to a new building. As Tom's preamble says, there were many other options, but it would be impossible to deal with those just for the sake of dealing with them. And I think these are the two options that are set out here for us to make a decision, are in fact the two options which would be deliverable and doable. There are other options which we just would never have chosen down the road. So I think at this point, what I take from that is that other things have been looked at and discarded, and this is the way that we're setting out how we can get the best value and the best output from our staff with these options. Go on, Malcolm.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Just on a general point, I mean, I've been a member of the Working Party since it started, and so I've accumulated quite a lot of knowledge over that time, and sort of absorbed the long journey that we've all been on. I think members of the authority who have been members all that time have done that to a lesser extent, and there are other newer members who haven't had that opportunity. And it's really important that the decision that we've taken in the past, if there are new members or even the existing members that challenge that, then let's hear it at this meeting and we'll have that debate. So it's important that all the members understand not only the decisions that have been taken and challenge those where they may disagree with them, but at least then come to a decision today about what we're going to do going forward. Thank you.
Sure. And just the other thing that Tom mentioned, sorry to go on, but at the start of this journey, our Rangers depot down Sawmill Lane was in a very bad state of repair. I don't want to say anything which would incriminate us, but I wouldn't want to have worked there myself for a long time. And that has been resolved brilliantly, and the building which they're just about to move into has been sorted out on the site report. So that's great. That was a part of the first step that we took, but what we're considering now is whether we consolidate our office on that site or not. Go on, Heather.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, I was also reassure new members that the due diligence we've done, it's been really, we've been on there and it has been carried out properly. And I've been involved with other stuff to do with hospitals before, and I found that considering that we're a small organisation, I think that's gone into it has been really good. And I went on the committee of this special committee because I had concerns about the right decision, and I just want to assure members that what we've done has been thorough. Okay, thank you.
Go on, Steve.
Yeah, I'm trying to still understand your point on the managed decline. Looking at the figures, it just looks like the prudent financial decision is to option 3B. Just looking at the figures for the long-term sustainability and the savings that we have, it just seems to be a better option. Maybe I'm reading it wrong. Life cycle costs alone.
We'll come to that in the private session.
Well,
This is why
I'm not talking
this is-
figures. I just saying it just looks like a prudent decision.
So, I thought, whose microphone? I can't see it. That's Colin down there. So we'll go on. We want to get through the report, and that's so there'll be plenty of time for questions. So on to section 3. It's Helen.
Yeah.
Morning, everyone. So, section 3, the strategic case. Here we really explore the rationale for investing in the authority's property, and we set out, really, this is answering the question, does something need to change? And we look at 2 key aspects. One is the physical condition of this building, and secondly, we explore what the authority's requirements are for an office. So turning to the condition of the building, in order to assess this building, in 2021 the authority commissioned Heritage House to provide a survey, and this report is in your pack as Appendix 4. It identified the need to make the building watertight. Inappropriate pointing, lead work, poorly fitted windows all allow water into the wooden structure of the building, and particularly water runoff from the car park is going into the ground floor and the basement. Internal adjustments over the years, which were intended to try and improve the working environment, have exacerbated this damp problem by holding water in the stone walls and really sealing off the building's ventilation. And the works needed to ensure that the building is watertight and well ventilated requires significant capital investment, which cannot be deferred. And to do so would accelerate the dilapidations, it would compromise the office environment, and ultimately reduce the capital value of this building. In September 21, the authority instructed a company called Align Partners, and they provided a full cost for the scope of works, and that report is in your private pack of Appendix 7C. At the NPA in September, on the 27th of September, officers reported to members which of that total sum could be considered a minimum essential works needed to maintain the old vicarage, and that included the roof works, the window repairs, and some external works. The authority has made a commitment to decarbonise its own operations by 2030 and is one of the key cornerstones of the property review. The old vicarage has 3 gas boilers, and the retention of the gas-fired heating system does really represent a significant barrier in eliminating the authority's scope, the ability to reduce our emissions. The minimum essential works list, therefore, includes the installation of a heat pump, but it did not even include the removal of their gas boilers and the asbestos flues. The redecoration of walls and floor coverings were at the time considered non-essential. However, officers now believe that work which we would need to undertake to the building would in effect require some degree of redecoration, simply just to make it safe and clean. So we now turn to the second part to assess if there is any need for change in response to staff and their working patterns and the way in which we want to work. Post-COVID, office work has become a hybrid of office and home working pattern and is now quite an established form in the authority for the majority of staff. And as many of you will know, this has been supported by corresponding technological advances in really good video conferencing. At the same time, the authority has embarked on a strategy to grow by becoming more project-based and project delivery increasingly needs collaborations of several teams, and therefore the demand for permanent desks and the space that staff needs continues to change. And these factors challenged officers to think about the role a building has in supporting staff to deliver the authority's objectives. The need for change is echoed by the views of staff, which have been collated through a series of workshops and consultations. A list of these events is included in your Appendix 2 and were reported to members in June 2022. I think it's fair to say that staff feedback can be summarised as the desire to want better standard of office, kitchens and toilets, a building which is more accessible to staff and to visitors, and a place where all staff are working under one roof, and in spaces which facilitate this collaboration. So we concluded that the minimum essential works, which might maintain a safe and legal work environment, do not adequately contribute to creating a working environment that meets the needs of staff. Therefore, officers do not consider that the minimum essential works presents a viable solution for the authority, and therefore the case for change is established. Through dialogue with members, it was agreed that the property review should progress through developing two remaining options in terms of their ability to meet the authority's future needs. And these options are: option 1, a full refurbishment and renovation of the old vicarage, combined with some minor structural improvements to the building's internal layout. And option 2, the relocation to a new purpose-built premises on Rickle Drive. So I don't know if anybody has any questions on that section.
Has that taken us through section 3? So that's I'm going to lose my voice before we finish. That's taken us through section 3, and as I kind of said at a long time, that's how we've come to the two options that we're considering in such detail. Any questions on section 3? Go on, George.
Thank you. So effectively, if I understand it correctly, we have the minimum essential works as the initial baseline that the authority considered in the first instance, and then it was decided that that is not adequate, and the two further options were considered. One is full refurbishment of the old vicarage, and then the new purpose-built office. And the minimum essential works, the estimate of that cost is what is in the first paragraph, in the first appendix in the private documents. And you are saying, if I got it correctly, that the difference between the minimum essential works and the full refurbishment of the old vicarage is stemming from two factors. One is the commitment of the authority to be net zero by 2030, and the other one is the staff requests and requirements to enhance the working environment.
I think just one point to clarify. So there are some minimum essential works that need to be undertaken to this property within the next 5 years to ensure that it's a safe and legal working environment. Back in 2021, we were able to extrapolate the cost of some of those works. However, officers don't feel the works that were cost at the time are conclusive, and therefore within section 3 you can see that we've sought to establish some additional works that we think are concomitant to those works that would need to be undertaken that were initially costed. We don't have a full costed option for that suite of minimum essential works. It wasn't provided at the time. We haven't had a steer from members to this point to develop that. So there were some initial costs based on some things that would need to be undertaken, like replacement or refurbishment of the roof, of the windows, replacement of the boilers. But as Helen identified, there are some additional works that follow as a result, partly as a result of those, and some other aspects that weren't costed, like the profiling of the car park here, which is part of the problem. It's causing water ingress to the ground floors of the building that weren't costed at the time.
However, Helen mentioned that the minimum essential works was the estimate at the time to make the building safe and legal.
So I understand it, the Align report, the 21 report, was the full cost of all of the works. And then back when our members asked the question, the essential works were taken out of that list and extrapolated, and the figure and the list of works was given to you. And that's the figure you referred to.
And that's to get us to safe and legal. And then in the first paragraph of the first private report, private appendix, you adjusted it by inflation to get us to safe and legal. Okay.
But as you can see within, and again, we'll pick this up when we move into private business, but we do not feel that number is fully reflective of the costs that are likely to be incurred in ensuring that this building is a safe and legal environment, working environment for the next 5 years and beyond.
So that's
we don't feel it's fully reflective. I use my words really carefully and deliberately. Fully reflective.
That's fine, but because the wording earlier was safe and legal and whether it is compliant. But the other question I asked is the difference between minimum essential works and the full refurbishment of the old vicarage stem mainly from two key factors. One is the net zero, and the second one is the employees' requirements and preferences.
Sorry, just repeat that again, George. I didn't quite understand you.
When the difference in costs between the minimal essential works and the option of full refurbishment of the old vicarage. So that the two reasons that Helen mentioned on why we are moving from minimum essential, why the members requested to move from minimum essential works to full refurbishment of the old vicarage, the two reasons were highlighted was one, the 2030 commitment of the authority in relation to net zero, and the second one is the survey and with the employees and the fact that a modern office would enhance working environment and meet the preferences of the workforce.
Yeah, sure. No, I'm with you now. I understand. So yes, those were two relevant reasons. A third reason that was relevant to all that as well was to improve accessibility into the building by changing the location of the entrance.
Okay. So three reasons basically. Yeah. Net zero, accessibility, and employee preferences.
Yeah, and to do the second bit or third bit as you used then, George, about the employee preferences, or trying to do what we can within the context of a listed building to create a better working environment that's more fit for purpose than what we have currently. What was yes, one of the reasons for that option being developed in the way that it was in Appendix 7C.
However, as far as you know, there is no problem that the employees have had over the years in terms of performance or in the authority.
No, and it's made clear within the wording of the report as well that the authority has been able to develop and succeed in spite of its office surroundings. The question ultimately when we get to that point for members to work out is whether that's going to be all right for the next 40 years.
Christine and then Steve.
So this might be one of those stupid questions, but just to make sure that I'm clear as we carry on throughout. So throughout the document, then, everything that's referenced as costs for refurbishment is not actually a costing for a full refurbishment of the building in order to meet needs. It's the essential repairs plus a bit.
No, well, in the next section, we really detail the two options, but essentially it's the other side. It's having dismissed the fact the essential works don't go far enough.
Yes.
Effectively, the remaining option is we therefore need to do a full refurbishment. So then section 4 will deal with what's constituted within option 1, which is remaining here, and the counter option.
Yeah.
It's like a like for like.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. No, that's helpful because we can start tossing terms around and it becomes a bit muddled, not only for people here, but people who might listen. And I assume this might be, an important decision, so we would just want to be clear. The other thing, which I'm not sure is set out here, but which I just wanted to raise at this point is, when we're talking about some of these essential repairs, some of them sound fairly urgent. So are we clear about what's going to need to be done to this building anyway, whether we stay here or move? And can we just be clear about what those essential, we're presumably going to have to make some investments if the roof is leaking and it's all as terrible as it sounds.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the question then is, what is the essential cost that we're going to have to cover, presuming that if we decided to move to a new building, it's going to take some time to achieve that, and we need staff to be safe and comfortable and not allow the building to fall into complete disrepair in the meantime.
Sure.
So what would those costs entail?
I mean, there's always a degree of risk in any building that the boiler might pack in tomorrow. We think it's unlikely that within the next 2 years we would need to incur significant additional capital investment on this place if members took a decision to move.
Okay, go on, Steve.
Actually, no, I'll wait. I think I know where George's line of questioning is going. I'll wait. Sorry, I'm just more looking at the environmental working conditions, in particular around humidity and everything else. But it's this focus on the safe and legal is concerning me a little bit. I think there's value here in the staff that needs to be valued a lot higher.
Particularly on the humidity, that the heritage report really looked at the damp of the building. I invite anybody to go and stand in the front room, which is the accounts room, when water is pouring off the road, and because the water is basically being allowed to get into the building, and then the measures of like sealing off the chimney stacks, for example, which were trying to reduce drafts in the building, and then taking away the natural ventilation. So you've got this double whammy of water getting into the building, but not being able to get out of the building naturally.
Yeah, just specifically on this point, you've just mentioned the damp and the health risks to the employees, yet we have waited 5 years and nothing was done about it.
So we haven't mentioned health risk, George. Yeah.
Just the damp, it was mentioned.
Sure. I think if officers envisaged any immediate health and safety risk, that's an intolerable risk to me as chief executive. I would have notified members. I do not envisage an immediate risk of the building collapsing, falling down, or something else causing a health and safety risk. I do envisage a longer term risk if we don't do something to ensure that we address some of the dilapidation in this building in the next 5 years.
I think the point is.
Sorry,
I just want to clarify the point. Chair, that the health risk is being managed by the way the building is being operated. That's the point, and that's the cost of managing that risk, with the managing humidity and the heating in particular, is very high. That was behind the point of the
yeah. So you'll have to let me manage the meeting, please, members. Otherwise, we're just not going to get through it in proper form. David Jeffels.
Thank you. In the early days, when the suggestion of finding new premises came to the authority, we were all taken, or those that were available, were taken round this building and explained in detail by officers and what we could see ourselves as to the state of the building. And I think it's focused very much in Helen's report at 3.2 and 3.3, where she speaks of standard of the building deteriorating and becoming ill-suited for staff as a professional working environment. Quite frankly, when I went round the building at the initial stages, I felt that that was an understatement, or it is still an understatement today. What concerned me particularly was the risk, the health risk, and egress and to staff working here. A lovely old building, but totally inappropriate for today's requirements. I believe it was Tom who mentioned earlier about the need to be legal and appropriate steps taken to safeguard our staff. And I would certainly endorse that. mention's also been made of the essential work that does need to be made to create a safe working environment. And I cannot think that the building as it stands today could be adapted to achieve that. Having said that, at the time when we were doing initial debates on it, I felt then, and I do now, although it's probably been taken over by events, but I would like it to have been the new complex being one that could be used as an area hub for other bodies, probably North Yorkshire Council, regional mayor and the combined authority, bringing them all together, perhaps with some commercial operations, to ensure that this area has a strong focus in providing services, and at the same time, I think it'd be good for the economy of Helmsley. I think that was considered. It wasn't pursued, but nevertheless it has been looked at. But as things stand at the present time, I'm fully behind the suggestions that are being made in this report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, David. We've got quite a long way to go, so I'd like us to try and move on through the report. But I'll go to Malcolm, and then we'll get back to.
I'll just give a very brief comment. I mean, George has asked a really difficult question, which is what work needs to be done now as a start to improving this building and getting it to where it wants to be. And we could have a long debate about, given that there's a long list of things that are wrong with it, where do you draw that line now, if that's the option you're going down? I'm not sure how we're going to resolve that either in public or in private today, but it's a difficult question to answer.
I've got some thoughts about that, but it's too soon for them yet. So we'll carry on. But I'll visit back to Tom. Section 4.
Yeah, so I'm just going to say a few words before handing over to Helen at the start of section 4, which deals with the economic case, again using the Treasury's 5-case model for that. And essentially, what we sought to do within section 4 is develop and explore the two options, provide a little bit more detail about those two options, what they consist of, and then test them essentially against three tests, which are their ability to meet the needs of a modern 21st century working environment, which was within the original scope of the property review. The second is their ability to contribute towards our environmental objectives as a National Park Authority, specifically in relation to carbon reduction, and again set out within the scope of the property review that all work should contribute positively to the authority's climate change aspirations. And then finally to explore them financially in terms of their economic impacts. And the reason we've done that is because, again, we feel a decision, firstly, within the context of the 5-case model, the economic case is based on not just the financial aspects, but also the socio-economic and environmental aspects. That's consistent with the Treasury's Green Book valuation approach, which is the standard methodology for considering the value for money of central government funded projects, which we think is appropriate in this instance. So what we're doing here is making sure that we can test either of those options against whether they can meet a couple of the key aspirations of the property review, i.e. how they help us achieve the working environment that we're looking for and how they can contribute towards our decarbonisation objectives. And then thirdly, the extent to which they impact financially in terms of cost. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Helen and Pete. So Helen's going to, in the next slide, if we can move on, Judith, Helen's going to explore the environmental and socio-economic aspects in terms of working environment, and then Pete will pick up on the financial the financial aspects. So Helen.
Thank you very much. So, as Tom says, in order to test whether the options can deliver the authority's ambitions, we must first establish what the desired outcomes are. So, office. With regard to the phrase 21st century offices, conceptually, I agree this is somewhat subjective, but nonetheless, officers have sought to identify what is most important and relevant to the authority. These include the improved opportunities to promote an activity-based working, collaboration and knowledge sharing, adapting for future growth and maximising opportunities to embed technology. And these desired impacts as a result of these conditions are aimed to increase productivity, innovation and long-term growth, as well as staff well-being and building accessibility. A research paper by University of Warwick looked at the factors determining the success of an office move and concluded that an office move can have the ability to significantly improve an overall business. Officers consider an activity-based workplace is particularly applicable, and the relevant research paper is a live link in your footnote of the report. The defined form of this office is characterised by being open plan, has no assigned desks, it supports hybrid working, and has a range of areas designated for different types of working activity and, importantly, also quiet areas. When we were working through this, it was also quite reassuring, I felt, that the research was consistent to messages in a seminar hosted by Yorkshire Council, which explored how office demands are evolving. And one point to highlight is the research that they did with younger generations, people starting out in their careers, because they were identifying the fact that they were concerned that the loss of a central working hub meant that it was detrimental to their career, and particularly not being around colleagues where there was that loss of the osmosis learning. Collectively, the research supports the view that the right office environment can have a really positive impact on fostering team cohesion, staff well-being and productivity. So moving on to the environmental aspect. The outcomes of the review identify that all work undertaken must have a positive contribution to the authority's carbon reduction policy. The aim is carbon neutrality, because the authority has a target to reduce Scope 1 and Scope 2 greenhouse gases. Moving away from the reliance on carbon fuels and replacement with green energy is the desired outcome of this target. The accessibility test, so therefore the two options are assessed in the context of the building, removing barriers to equal accessibility into and around the building and to all of its facilities. And we touch upon car parking and we compare the two options in their ability to provide suitable provision. So, option 1. In detail, option 1 is the full refurbishment and renovation of the old Vic, and it's combined with some structural improvements to the building's internal layout. So the full works which were costed in that Align report are the repairs to the roof and windows, repointing, refurbishment of some kitchens and toilets, redecoration, a greener heating system, some limited changes to the internal layout, and a future replacement of this committee room and the office above. So despite this being a really comprehensive list of works, the positive impact is confined by the limitations of the construction and its listed status. A full repair and renovation option remains limited in its ability to create an open plan layout. Staff on this site are spread over 2 buildings, as we have the studio, and this building over 3 floors, and most of the offices are limited to 4 to 6 people. Meeting rooms are limited, and there are constraints on the ease with which the building can be upgraded with new technology. So against the environmental test. In terms of the carbon reduction agenda, the authority has already reduced emissions generated by electricity demand through employing a renewable tariff. The building's EPC rating is poor, and this is due to the reliance on the gas boilers for heating. Scope 1 emissions would require this replacement with air or ground source heat pumps. However, on-site generation, such as solar, is typically used to offset a proportion of the electricity demands for those pumps, but the space here for solar panels is limited. Thermal efficiency is essential to maximise the benefits of low temperature heating systems, which otherwise operating costs will increase. Whilst the works to the building are comprehensive and will go a long way to addressing the damp, the nature of the building means that it does need to be naturally ventilated, and therefore that might present a challenge to the efficiency of the low temperature heating. To test option 1 against accessibility. Similarly to the changes of creating an open plan office space, the same constraints present challenges in removing the barriers to accessibility. The list of works seeks to reconfigure the layout such that the entrance lobby and reception would move to the rear. So using this entrance here and okay. Moving this rear door to become the front door. But exclusively, but not solely, because it's difficult to install a lift here, inequality of the two access of the building would remain largely unchanged. And the final test of option 1 is car parking. And as anybody who's ever tried to park on site knows, car parking is limited and the lack of availability further exacerbated on busy meeting days. Staff therefore tend to have to park on the surrounding roads. There are limited options to improve this through external works. It may be possible for that section towards the end of Bondgate to be surfaced, but we imagine that might evoke strong public objection, and it is challenging because the garden is within the curtilage of the listing status. So option 2, we'll run through that in detail, and again, so you can contrast and compare, do it against the 4 tests. So, can option 2, which is the relocation to a new building, provide offices fit for 21st working? The proposal to build a new office from scratch does afford the authority the opportunity to design something which meets the authority's exact requirements, and it does resolve the challenges it is unable to address within the limitations of the old vicarage. The proposal is for a single building which would provide head office for all of Helmsley-based staff and will provide more flexibility in accommodating visiting staff from other offices. The new depot, as Jim has referred to, is in close proximity to the proposed office, which helps to support this staff demand for a single cohesive site. The revised elevations and floor plans are attached in your Appendix 5, and the proposal, I'll just run through quickly, includes the following accommodations. So on the ground floor, different zones, we have a reception area, a large flexible committee room where we have one large space which will have a retractable door, so we can have one very large committee room or 2 smaller meeting rooms. We also have some offices, a large communal kitchen, which is one of the demands of staff, a classroom. We need to provide class facilities for the apprentices ranges, and also one of the demands of staff are quite often the lack of showers in this building. So we provide better changing and shower facilities. And then mentally moving upstairs to the first floor, this is principally the open plan office, and it will accommodate the majority of the desks together with the collaborative spaces, meeting rooms with a range of different sizes, from a 1-person sort of Zoom meeting call hub to meeting rooms with 8 to 10 people. We'd also have some very designated quiet areas as well as a small tea point. And I think it's worth sort of envisaging that the open plan floor plate with freestanding furniture does provide full flexibility if we need to move furniture around, further down the line, looking ahead as demands continue to change. The office has been designed to seek maximum natural light, ventilation and temperature control, and purpose-built IT infrastructure will support requirements, and the open plan and the ability to put in modern racking systems does more easily facilitate changing data cables and responsive to technology upgrades and changes. We do accept that one of the challenges of working in an open plan environment can be background noise. And this has been addressed by incorporating methods of noise reduction built into the design early on. And that's through the choice of floor and wall coverings, as well as having lots of designated quiet spaces. Externally, the car parking facilities for the public and staff have been designed together with designated disabled spaces, lots of EV charging bays, as well as bike storage. So to test option 2 against accessibility, the architects have designed the building in line with what is called Part M of the building regulations, as well as British standards and something called WELL standards, which promotes both health and well-being as well as accessibility. And the principles of design are listed in your Appendix 6. The open floor plan and the presence of a lift clearly promote accessibility to all areas of the building. And these details have been shared with the authority's EDI group, and we also had a staff group who were consulted, and we had their feedback. And the final test for option 2 is environmental. One of the, as we've touched upon, the fundamental design principles requested by the authority was a thermally efficient building, which is as close as is reasonably possible to carbon neutrality. The building has been designed to maximise thermal efficiency. Solar panels on the roof, in conjunction with the heat pump, provide green energy, and the calculations show an expected EPC rating of an A+, which by definition assumes that the building is generating more energy than it is expected to consume. These figures are based on predictive occupancy models. So battery storage of that excess energy is an option to provide power, particularly we think for EV charging. And the decision on that made, we think reasonably will delay that decision until after a year of occupancy, because then you have true data to reflect how much power you're using and how much has been generated. We've put in the design cabling for anticipated future demand for more EV points, because it's cheaper to lay the cables before you put the concrete and the tarmac in. And obviously further points, EV points in the future will help this conversion to carbon neutrality. I just want to close this section before any questions on a note acknowledging disruption to staff, which we can't avoid in either option. Should remain in the old vicarage, staff would likely relocate for a period of time for the works, because it wouldn't be possible to do any work really here, any meaningful work while staff are still in occupation. Move to an office. I've had a look. I don't think it's going to be possible to stay in Helmsley for that interim period, and then staff would need to move back. If we move to a new office, there would be one move to that office. And so it's probably covered quite a lot there, but hopefully following that sort of structure helps people follow the thinking if they've got any questions.
Just to be clear, in terms of the business case, this takes us up to 4.37.
That's
so,
just
yeah.
what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
So 4.37. I'm going to take a few questions for Helen, and then I think before we go on to the financial stuff, it's time that we had a little break. So, any questions for Helen on where we got to, Heather?
Yeah. Thank you for that. Just to comment.
It's my fault.
I think we've got a problem here about people with disabilities and access for people with disabilities. I mean, we haven't got a lift here. I mean, even if we carried out all this work necessary, what improvements would be made for help them? I mean, like with toilets, except would there be much in there that they would benefit from if we stayed here?
So the provision of the works in that line is realistically, it's about changing the entrance, because that's that as in a step-free entrance. I think realistically, that's all you can really do. Apart, we already have a disabled toilet facility, but there's nothing in the kitchen too. But in terms of upstairs or in the manoeuvring around the corridors and the small offices, there's nothing we can do about that here.
And so on the new build, that would be taken into account, would be more opportunities, because we are, we're very inclusive. That's what we do, and I think we're quite limited here because of the structure of the building.
Yes, okay. It's the structure of the building which is really confining our options, and the structure is not something which we can resolve.
Okay. Just to, again, going back to the property, sorry? We had a good day out to look at different offices. Some of it was mind-blowing, like grass on walls, and it was a bit mind-blowing. So, you haven't gone in as blind. We have looked at all options, modern working, and, so please be assured, members, that we had it was quite informative, and I thought I was on the holidays, we went all over the place, but it was, again, about using space properly and quiet spaces, and it was. So I like to think that we've gathered all that in there before we went and looked at that. Thank you.
Go on, Steve.
Just a minor observation. You mentioned the battery storage and the decisions to put it off. I wonder whether you've missed a calculation on the battery storage going in as soon as possible, possibly even before solar sometimes now. New data is showing that battery storage actually, because you can capture the sheet rate at night time to deploy during the expensive time of the daytime, is actually proving to be a very good economic choice for heat pumps in particular. So it may be something worth looking at to reduce costs even more.
I mean, I think the decision on that is I agree with you. I mean, partly it's an economic decision to see whether it's worth in a year's time, because the model is on anticipated. Yeah, but it's great. I mean, we've got the figure in the build spec to install the batteries, so it might be something that we exactly. Yeah.
Go on, Christine.
Thanks. Obviously a huge amount in this section, so a lot of things to touch on. Just a couple of kind of more general points, I suppose. I appreciate the focus in on the activity-based working arrangements and some of the concerns that staff have probably quite rightly had about the smaller working spaces in this current facility. However, as somebody who spent many, many years working in open plan offices, they have their own sets of problems. And it tends to be a bit of a pendulum. So you move to the open plan because everybody's tired of being all crunched in. And then immediately you realize you've got that 1 or 3 or 6 people who happen to be loud talkers, and nobody can get anything done. And everybody wants just a space to be, and to be quiet, and to have some spaces where they can get together in small groups and work. And I appreciate that a new office will allow some flexibility with that, and that there's an intention to have quiet working spaces and group areas. And again, working in an office that's just been refurbished to accomplish all these lofty ambitions, I can say that it doesn't always work that way. So it's just important to bear in mind that there's not some, however much research has been done, there's not some gold standard that, well, as soon as we do that, everybody will be happy. As soon as you do that, everybody will be happy for a bit, and then they'll want something that they don't have now, or then. So that's just a point to raise for people to think about. There's a bit in this about older buildings that, I've heard perhaps from members rather than in the paper, that they cannot be adapted to modern work. And I just want to raise that, you know, obviously we live in a country where there's a huge culture of restoring heritage buildings for all sorts of purposes, almost always not what they were originally intended for, and those things can be accomplished. So it's you know, it's not an impossibility, it's a choice. The one other thing, well, two other things I was going to raise. One was about the car parking, and again, as somebody who's visited this building a number of times over many years, I've never had any problem finding parking. So I'm not sure that's, yeah, it's an inconvenience maybe if you have to walk, but I'm not sure that's an overriding reason. The one thing that I did also want to raise, and I'll stop there, is this around the criteria that we've used, and I'm just a little bit surprised that that criteria hasn't considered about the office for the national park remaining in the national park, because obviously Rickle Drive sits outside of that. That's, you know, no doubt a decision was taken for all sorts of good reasons about purchasing that particular piece of land, etc. But it's something that's really concerning to me, that we're talking about, you know, the future of how we want to operate as a national park and where we want to be in 40 years. And what we could say by deciding to build something on a piece of land outside the national park is that the National Park Authority doesn't believe that living and working within the national park is viable or important. And I think fundamentally, I really struggle on that basis, and it's something that's not really addressed in the report, and that we haven't recently anyway spoken about. So it's just something to have in the back of people's minds, I guess, as we go forward. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Just I'm gonna make a couple of comments, and then I'm gonna have a break, I think, if that's okay, unless it's something that's really urgent about. Go on then.
I completely agree with Heather that we did visit some very nice, posh and luxurious offices, and they were also empty. I don't know why they were empty, possibly because of what Christine said. People are not very comfortable with an open space if they have not been used to an open space. I don't know. But the other thing is there are issues that that employees raised with me. For example, some of them are very happy to walk 2 minutes to Helmsley Town Centre, get their lunch, and come back quickly to the office to do their work. They are concerned that in the new offices they will have to walk much longer period of time, especially if it is cold and in the weather, etc. So there are some unintended consequences where we might be thinking that on average we are making everyone happier, but in reality we might not. And in terms of the car parking, again, with more people working from home and with the hybrid working environment, that is less of an issue now than over the past decades in which the authority has been operating. The other point, just to finish the other ones, is environmental consideration is extremely important, of course, especially for a national park authority. In the new building, because it's a new build, it will have much better environmental safeguards. It will be compliant with the new modern building regulations. So whether it is the National Park Authority or somebody else building in that land, it will be a good environmentally friendly building. However, at the moment, the proposition is to sell these offices of the National Park Authority, but we don't know what the new owners are going to do with them, whether they are going to improve their environmental compliance or not, whether they are going to improve their efficiency or not. And therefore, from a planet's perspective, if we relocate to a new place, then we know that there will be one building that will be environmentally friendly, but we don't know what's going to happen in this building. If we invest in this building, then this building will have an enhanced improvement, and whoever is going to build something else on that land will also be compliant with the new regulations. So from the planet's perspective, there will be more environmentally friendly structures if we invest in this building, making it environmentally friendly, and also, frankly, leading by example. As a National Park Authority, we sat here as members in planning committees requiring people to comply with all sorts of regulations, heritage, etc., in their own buildings, their own farming structures within the National Park Authority. And when we, as a National Park Authority, are faced with a decision about our own building, then actually we run away from the decision and we go somewhere else because it is easier, and we don't respect the heritage and the environmental impact that we can do as a National Park Authority by improving this building.
I think we're straying into statements instead of questions. I did have a question. I'm going to have a break before we deal with the numbers. On the solar panels and the electric vehicle charging, I mean, that was an issue. But we're not. Do we have any proposal to put solar panels on the depot that we just built?
When the decision was made to reuse the steel structure of the depot, the weighting of them isn't strong enough to take solar panels in their current form. The decision was therefore made not to put them on the roof. However, predictions are for those to get lighter and lighter and lighter. So I think it's a medium-term position where you would add them in. I would also add that when looking at that, the electricity demands for that building are minimal, and therefore almost like the power that we aren't generating by solar panel isn't going to be great.
No, but I think what I think is we have a policy to move to electric vehicles, and I remember Patrick James talking about something on the continent whereby they had some battery storage which gathered up during the day, charge your vehicle at night. Whether the panels are on the roof or whether they're on extra land that we have or something. I know it's not exactly in here because it's another step further, if you like, beyond. But I just wondered whether we had any account to that. The other thing, as Christine says, when we had the trip around, I have no experience of open plan working. I imagine it would be good for the authority to know what the chief executive was talking about at any point in the building, and also the comments that came back with the one thing that people argue about is whether it's too hot or too cold. Those are the joys of being at work, aren't they? But I think what I just want to stress again is the journey that we've come along. And if you go back to 2.4, it talks about the decisions the authorities made. In June 2022, we purchased the land for a new headquarters. So we have discussed all these pros and cons endlessly for 5 years. And I went to the staff meeting before Christmas, and I think it was about 130 strong. It was a big bunch of us, and quite a diverse bunch too. And I think I was the only member there. But hearing them talk and a bit of banter, and obviously a few pokes at members when they're not there, that's what the meeting's there for, you know. But they seemed a pretty committed bunch, and they seem to be quite keen on getting some investment in their working arrangements. And of course, you could say, you know, if that's what you talk about, that's what people do. But when we started doing this, members, including myself, were very conscious of the point that Christine makes that, you know, as a National Park Authority, we have a duty to look after listed buildings. Why would we not lead by example? And I think about half of the English national parks have offices in the park, and I think half of them have offices out of the park. And so it's really important that we demonstrate or do the right thing. But also, you know, if a listed building that we have in the back is not the right thing, it would be better for that building for somebody else to do the right thing with it than for us to continue to do the wrong thing with it. So it's all swings and roundabouts, isn't it? But I just want to stress that continually we've made the decision along the journey that we think moving to a new premises on the same site is the preferred option. Otherwise, we wouldn't have bought the land, we wouldn't have spent the money that we've done now, we wouldn't be doing all that stuff. I agree that being able to put the Ranger Depot in the building that we bought is a significant step forward, but it still hasn't answered the question that we've done. And so this that we're considering now is called the final business case. And for me, to suddenly decide actually all the work we've done now was completely wrong would make us look rather stupid, because
That's the point of the business case.
exactly. And so we've done all that work to come to this, but it still needs to add up, doesn't it? And somebody said to me, actually, a chap who's done some reviewing on this said, Jim, it's never too late to make the right decision. That's a really important point. But we have come to this, with a continual set of decisions that are set out in your paper, that this is the preferred option if it's affordable, if it's practical, if the numbers add up. And so that's what we're looking at now. It would be kind of perverse for us to suddenly go off on some totally new ideas at this stage. I'm going to take a break now.
Chair, I have a serious issue with what you have just said.
That's fine.
Actually, what is the point of this meeting if actually it will look stupid if we don't approve the decision of the officers?
No, this is our decision, Judge. I'm going to take a break now, and we're going to have maybe 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll go on with the financial case and be. Thanks, members. We've had 10 minutes, so we'll get back to it again, please. If we could start the live stream. Okay, so we're up and running. Where did we get to? We got to Pete. Go on, Pete.
Thanks, Chair. So this is from 4.37 in the 4.38 in the report. So this takes on sort of section 4 and financial appraisal element of this. So I think first off, just to start, obviously we have a little bit of a private public thing around some of the financial numbers. So I thought I'd just reiterate that some of the numbers in the detail are in private session later on. As we undertake that, we'll get to section 6, and some of that will have a knock-on effect back to this section 4 financial appraisal section. What I will do though is go through sort of the detailed approach that we took to it. I'll talk about the principles behind it, and I'll talk about the summary numbers that come out of it, which are all in the public reports. But when we want to talk about any detail, we might need to take that later in the private session, which I'll let you manage, Chair. In terms of the report, so this section of the report looks at the two options in the paper, option 1 and 2. And they've been modelled financially. What we have done is we've employed Grant Thornton to come and do this piece of work for us, in part to provide some objectivity, good working knowledge of their own, and some challenge around the modelling that we did on the two options. So Grant Thornton have done this piece of work for us, which you'll be able to find in Appendix 7B, which is under private papers with the detail that's in there. But that shows some really detailed modelling and assumptions that have gone into this. In terms of the approach, so the approach we've talked already about Green Book valuation. So Green Book valuation has a number of sort of tenets to it. One of them is financial, but actually it's looking at best value. And I think it's quite a good opportunity actually just to talk about what best value is when we're looking at the business case. And it's not just pound value. I think quite often when you look at best value, you think it's purely pounds. Actually, all of the elements that we're talking about today about the two options and comparing the two options, best value is about all of those assets, not just the pound value. But clearly the pound value is really, really, from a public sector point of view, a really, really important one as well. In terms of the 5-case model, so the financial appraisal is part of that. And one thing to point out in terms of within Green Book value, what you can do is sometimes try to put financial values to non-financial elements. What we have done in this is actually stick purely to cash flows and financial elements in the financial appraisal. So for instance, if you said there was going to be an increase in productivity from the two options, there is ways in which you can try and put a pound value to that. But we've avoided that because it's quite spurious finger in the air. It's not genuine cash flows for the future in terms of the financial position for the authority. So we've kept it cleanly down to just financial and actual cash implications. The approach then is net present value. So it's worth just taking a moment to explain what net present value is. So effectively it's looking at an investment that's multiple years with multiple implications of cash flows and actually modelling it over the life of that asset. Now from our point of view in this appraisal we've done it over 40 years, and that's because actually from an accounting perspective for the authority, we look at our assets each year and our buildings for a 40-year economic life. So it just aligns to our accounting policies. Grant Thornton agreed with that approach as well in terms of using 40 years as the appraisal period. Net present value then looks at all of those cash flows over 40 years, both the ins and the outs. So it's used quite often, not just for this, where actually the majority of things here are costs. It's also where you've got sort of income appraisals as well. So it looks at income over time, but also it looks at cash costs over time as well. Broadly, this model is about the costs over 40 years. And what it does do is it equates back that 40 years worth of cash flows to a current day number so that the options are comparable. And that's because in both different options, you've got different cash flows in different years, all the way along in different time periods. It converts it back to what it would be in today's money, so you can actually compare the options. As I mentioned before, Grant Thornton have done the modelling for us. They've done a number of scenarios in the pack, 4 scenarios in total. One of those scenarios is for option 1, and 3 of those are for option 2, with some variables within that. But the paper focuses on option 3B in those options, which we think is the most prudent one for option 2. So there is scenario 3B is the one we use for option 2 in the comparisons. In terms of key data sources and assumptions, so option 1 The capital works in there are derived from the Align report we've mentioned previously. We've also had our cost consultants peak do a secondary piece of work, so that sort of reaffirms some of those values. And Grant Thornton have then applied BCIS rates to that to bring it up to 2025 numbers. So that report was in 2021, and Grant Thornton have used the appropriate rates to bring that up to a 2025 valuation. The life cycle costs in there are based on assessments of current actuals and maintenance costs. And it's based on making sure that over that 40-year period we maintain, in the case of this option one, this building to the levels it should be. So not going back to not maintaining it appropriately. If we're going to invest now, we then need to invest over 40 years to maintain the integrity of this building and the working environment we want it to be. And then we've also got the estimate of sales of assets. So under option one, if we were to stay here, that would be the sale of the land at Rickall Drive. And then finally, there's a contingency built in as well on the sort of the initial capital element of doing this building up, which is at 15%. So option two, so the build cost for option two, it comes from the tendered value of the build. So we have done a tender relating to that new build, the design of which you can see in the pack, and the build cost links directly back to that tendered value. The life cycle costs, so they come from our architects cost consultants. So in line with the building design that we've got in the pack, they've done a full 40-year sort of replacement valuation around all of those kind of assets. And then in terms of running costs, we've assumed that actually broadly running costs will be the same for both buildings with two exceptions. One of those is utilities. So the increased amount of solar power, etc., we can do on the new build allows us to make bigger savings on utility bills than we could here. But the flip side to that is there is a higher maintenance charge relating to moving to there because there'll be more kit in the building than there would be in this one. And indeed, maintenance of that solar panels and increased solar technology as well. So there is a higher maintenance charge associated with that. We've also put the estimate of sales of assets in there. So if we were to move under option two, the sale of this building and the proceeds from that is part of the equation. And then finally, contingency again. So we've done a 15% contingency, so the same on both options onto that kind of initial capital build cost outlay. So to summarise in terms of the numbers in the paper, so the result of the NPV is in the public paper. Like I said, on option one, that's scenario one in the Grant Thornton report, that has a number of 4.303 million in terms of the NPV value of that 40-year life into today's values. And then option two has a very marginally lower number than that in terms of cost, at 4.262, and that's based on scenario 3B in the Grant. 3A in the Grant Thornton paper, apologies, 3A. So that's the two comparisons at that NPV level. What it does show is that there is a very, very marginal weight towards moving in the figures. However, what we've also put in there is sensitivity analysis. So what we asked Grant Thornton to do was perform a number of sensitivity analysis equations across the different factors. So across the build cost, across the running cost assumptions that we've got, that capital life cycle program over 40 years, and also the valuations of the assets we have for sale, just to do how much would it have to change in each of those instances in order for the two options to be comparable. And I think what that illustrates is the sensitivity analysis on some of those is low. The actual margin between the two is very small. So actually broadly from my perspective as Section 151 officer, financially the two are actually fairly comparable. So whilst it's marginal, of course, we naturally have estimates and assumptions in here on both sides of the equation on both options. And therefore, I think the two options from a financial perspective are broadly comparable within the appraisal. And I think that's the summary that the paper makes. I think at that point, I'll draw a line there, Chair, because I think going into the details, etc., but certainly happy to take any questions on the approach.
Again.
Thanks, Pete, and thanks for all of that. It's been really interesting. Just one question so I understand it, and again, it's probably in there. So just so I understand it, in the utilities, which really come to be, it looks like the biggest difference in the net present value, because that's the really big difference. it's working out in the first 10 years about 50k a year. So we're expecting to save 50k a year in heating and lighting and all of that. So that's why I'm trying to work it out. That's where I've made mistakes. So I would just like some help, please.
Yeah, the saving per year is 22,000 on the utilities. So our utility bills at the moment are about 27,000 for the authority for this building. We anticipate that we will more or less get utility bills down to practically zero with the amount of technology we can put into the new building. In terms of, obviously, there'll be a cost, but there'll be income being generated as well from the technology. We'll also be able to reduce it a little bit on here, which is why it's not the full 27, it's 22, because actually there will be something we can do on here as well, but it will be limited.
So it's 22k.
So 22k saving on
saving,
utilities. I think it's worth, there's a couple of numbers obviously we can talk in the public paper element. So, but I think there are a couple of figures in there that are quite relevant. That one is one of them. The sale of capital assets is another one, because that will be early on in the NPV, so it does have a large impact. And then the bills costs. So actually, three of those are all really quite relevant numbers to. But all of those numbers actually in that 40 years do have a relevant amount as well in terms of the impact on the case. But yes, utilities and sale of the assets are two particular ones.
So just remind me, do you want to do section 5 or do you want to go into the... Okay, so well, Helen's going to do section 5 and then Pete will take us back through the private paper.
Chair, can I just a couple of questions on what Pete just mentioned?
Sure.
The first one is, I think you're right about the difficulty in estimating costs that are not financial and benefits that are not financial as well. Like, say, for example, productivity of employee. It is impossible to see whether it's going to increase or potentially decrease as well, and how you put a number on that. The same with the reputational damage to the National Park Authority, whether enhanced or damage, we don't know. Again, there are different factors and different arguments with respect to that as well. So there are issues here. But can I just, if I remember correctly, when we sold the building next door, which had smaller value to this one, the sale price was significantly better than what we had initially anticipated. So that was a big success story for the National Park Authority. And certainly, if I remember correctly, on an asset like that, which was much smaller than this one, the margin of profit was significant, something like 10% or 15%, I think, from the initial estimate. We were able to sell it at the 10 to 15%, which obviously in these figures will wipe the margin either way significantly because of the uncertainty. And no one knows, anyone who has any property don't know for how much they are going to be able to sell it for, but we are talking about a big margin either way.
Sure. And that's in the assumptions. We can talk about that in private session. Yeah. So, go on, Helen.
Okay, so the penultimate stage in this Treasury report format is section 5, which is what they call the commercial case, and we have merged that to make one format with the management case as well. So in this section, we lay out the steps taken by the authority in achieving a contract which is commercially robust, and through the procurement of professional services, and how it has been tested in the commercial market. We also look at the key components in the viability of implementing the project. So, what steps have been taken to ensure the contract which is commercially robust? The first step was getting right advice upon which we can build the project. So, in order to ensure that the authority receives special advice necessary to determine the options for consideration here today, it went through various procurement exercises to appoint a range of specialist advisors. These advisors included RASCS registered valuers, building surveyors, architects, structural engineers, project managers, and cost consultants. The scope and indicative costs for the renovation of the old vicarage are based on the building surveys we've mentioned at Heritage House, who advised on the works to make the building watertight and to prevent its further deterioration. And the initial costs, as we referred to, were provided in the Aligned Property Partners report. So, acknowledging that remaining in the old vicarage, albeit in potentially a much better condition, can only go so far in addressing the requirements of the property review. Investment and fees to develop the project further has been focused on option 2, the move to Rickle Drive. In September 23, members approved the proposal, therefore, to progress to a full tender exercise for the construction of a new headquarters and to appoint the project team. A critical foundation in supporting recommendations to you today is the assurance that the commercial contract has been robustly tested. The tender exercise has therefore tested the recommended contract 3 times. Firstly, in the open market when 5 firms were invited to tender. Secondly, when the preferred 2 firms went through a rigorous value engineering exercise. And thirdly, when the scope of works was further scrutinised with the preferred contractor. This exercise was undertaken over a period of about 6-7 months, and the choice of preferred contractor was further scrutinised in contractor interviews. The commercial risks are framed, if you like, in the form of the legal contract. By securing a design and build contract, the authority benefits from the contractor taking on the design responsibility. This enables us to secure the best contract price as well as protection against the risk of cost increases. It is worth noting that this is something which we suspect may be more difficult to do on the old vicarage, as the builder is unlikely to take on the risk of so many unseen unknowns. The NPV calculations for both options are based on the same contingency of 15%. Whilst we do accept the builders are likely to want to limit the risks to a standard contract on this building and or apply a high contingency, we chose not to differentiate in the valuation because it hasn't yet been market tested. We are conscious, therefore, that the cost of contractor risk mitigation is probably therefore unrepresented in the assessment of the old vicarage renovation costs. The proposed contract is for 12 months, but it is agreed that the contractor cannot be responsible for delays attributed to utility companies. Officers have therefore de-risked this element as far as possible, with officers taking on the task of handling any utility works which need to take place prior to the contractor starting on site. Most significant of those is the negotiation with National Power Grid to relocate the stays to the electricity pylons which are currently compromising the site. And they should be on site today. We now turn to the key components which the proposal must have in place to ensure the viability of the proposal. As we all know, a planning permission is essential to any development scheme. In June 2025, members asked officers to seek planning permission. The original application, submitted in September 25, was for a single building. You may recall this was the design where the depot single building where the design was for the depot and the offices be integrated, and this was approved by the council in January 25. Then, as the authority progressed with cost analysis and did further staff consultations, it was considered that the proposal for the new HQ in the depot could be improved by detaching the garage and repurposing the old printworks. The depot works were approved in June last year, and the project, I'm pleased to say, is due for completion in March. The single office design was therefore submitted as an amendment to the original planning application in September. I can report there have been no public objections to the proposal, and we received a letter of support from residents. The decision was due on the 29th of December, and whilst the case officer has advised that this will be approved, we are waiting for a deed of variation on the section 106 to be completed, and we hope that that will be processed by the council's legal team by the end of January. The size of the proposed development site triggers the requirement to provide a statutory 10% improvement in biodiversity net gain, or BNG. The authority has a viable and deliverable off-site solution at Cliff Plantation at Sutton Bank. BNG is a pre-commencement condition to planning and to development, and therefore we have been doing all that we can to progress this ahead of schedule to try and reduce the risk of third-party delays. Upon the confirmation of registration with Natural England, the discharge application was submitted to the council in early December. The final part of this section is the management dimension, which looks at measures put in place to support deliverability, monitoring and evaluation of the scheme. Some of the key indicators of project success in this context are deemed to be the continuity of knowledge. Whilst we have re-tendered and tested each of the RIBA's contracts in terms of cost, key advisors have been retained. Looking ahead, part of the contract discussions have secured agreement on the draft programme of works, the cost drawdown schedule, and we've set meeting and reporting expectations. And I think it's really important in agreeing these parameters in advance, as it helps to set the tones, really positive partnership, which helps ensure a project runs smoothly. Other elements, such as early sign-off with the insurance company, particularly on cladding materials and construction methods, all help to reduce the list of potential surprises. Internally, the authority has a robust audit system in place to sign off invoices, and regular reporting between myself as property manager, CEO and head of corporate services ensure that any risks to the project's delivery are reported promptly. One of the proponents of success is change management and ensuring staff engagement and support. Directors will continue to regularly update staff, and should the project progress, staff will be invited to consult on the interior decoration and how they want to operate in the space. We have already seen how regular meetings with teams on the new depot have helped to smooth the transition process, and everything that we can learn on this building can be applied to any decision made on the HQ. And that brings my section to an end.
Thanks, Helen. So, unless there's something urgent that you need to ask about that, otherwise, Jane.
I just wanted to obviously know figures, but from the Align Partners costings in 21 to the provisional costings now, we've nearly doubled. And I just wanted to, it's gone up, sorry, it's gone up 50%. Sorry, not doubled, it's gone up 50%. And I know costs of materials have gone up, and I know that, but I don't think they've gone up 50% in that time.
The matrix to calculate the original Align figures are BCIS rates per square foot, and initially Align and Peak Partners provided an inflationary adjustment, and we also specifically asked Grant Thornton to do that independently, so that is their professional view. Because it's BCIS inflation, not sort of monetary inflation, so it is higher.
Yes, but for actual for the build costs, you know, so we're actually talking build costs, if you see what I mean. So that's what I'm talking about, the build costs. So the build costs have gone up 59%. Because you've all got the quote of what you've got now, obviously I can't speak numbers, versus what you had as when we were originally working for them. And I just want to understand how the build costs have gone up 59%.
So again, not talking numbers but principles. So I think Helen's mentioned there around we put on a rather crude inflation related to CPI. That was already a big number in terms of 21 to 25 because actually inflation, particularly on materials and things like that, has been astronomical over that period. We then asked Grant Thornton actually completely separately to do a piece of work using actually much more appropriate rates. So BCIS rates from a build point of view are much more appropriate than the CPI that kind of I was using rather crudely before. So the BCIS rates are very much Grant Thornton's use. They consulted with their property team, not just their financial team, to put the appropriate rates on. So they've applied the rates that they believe are right for those build costs over that period of time. And I think inflation in particular on some materials and steel and things like that, has been astronomical over the period. So I'd need to check the numbers in terms of the 59% movement between the two. But certainly in terms of a very substantial increase over that period of time, that's representative of sort of market inflation, but also Grant Thornton's expertise from their property team and the specific rates that they use for build costs.
Yeah, it was just on a figure of 59 seemed an awful lot to go up in 3.
It is. I'll check the 59 number shortly, but in terms of increasing costs, it's been a big period for inflation.
Yeah, I understand that because of doing building works in London, and I understand that. A large flat with stories of flats with all the sort of Grenville issues, so I do understand all of that. But I just wanted to understand why it had gone up, and therefore, if it has gone up so much, have we considered that perhaps we have to modify our design to maybe then maintain a budget that would allow us not to have other consequences of then having, a large amount each year that we're going to be paying out extra, if you see what I mean?
I suppose in terms of modifying the option 1 and what we've been through in terms of what's included in option 1, I guess that's something for members.
It was Rickle Drive I'm really talking about, because I think that's where we're, that's really where we're aiming for. It looks
okay,
like
in terms of
I'm trying to understand that.
I suppose the increase in costs, I was conflating the two, because I think the increase in cost is very much about option 1, where the aligned report's been increased by BCIS rates. That's very much around here. Option 2 is based on specifically on very recent tendered costs for the build.
No, it was from theirs for Rickle Drive, for theirs from whatever. It was Rickle Drive on both of those. I wasn't looking because we've already agreed not to do further tenders on here. I was doing it on the Rickle Drive only.
Sure, yeah. So I think there might be some conflation of different sections in the business case, but in the context of section 5, I think over the course of the design and tender process, with starting with the work we did with Bowman Riley and then subsequently with Pete, we sought to undertake value engineering to ensure that the specification is appropriate, but not overspec to the extent that it's adding unnecessary cost.
So engineering, what does that mean?
In essence, we tried to take unnecessary cost out of the design.
Steve?
Which leads into my question, actually, it's around, obviously we mentioned the scopes 1 and 2 earlier, but I'd be interested in how the procurement process actually mandated some of this criteria as well. You say try to remove some of the costs out. Are we talking environmental costs, life cycle of materials, that sort of thing? Or have we built those into our procurement strategy, and are we asking our contractors for scope 3 in particular?
First stage of that, value engineering exercise when you sit down with the contractors is partly through the interviews that I did with them, with the architects and the cost consultants, and particularly when the 2 top contractors were asked, they were asked to come to the meeting pre-prepared with costs which they could strip out. One of their natural go-tos was reduce the number of solar panels, and in the meeting I basically easily crossed off their suggestions which did not meet our criteria for the property review. The exercise which I'd done with the architects in writing the scope of work, i.e. the design of it, that is where we saved quite a lot of money. in terms of changing aesthetics, if you like, mostly internally, some externally. So in terms of, one figure off the top of my head is we saved £40,000 in changing the design of internal partition walls. And it was that sort of design rather than these are the absolute protected goals of the building.
I'll go to George and then David.
Thank you. I actually do concur with Jane about the numbers because, say, for example, the figure about the minimum essential works, which appears in the first paragraph in the first appendix in the private papers, has been inflated compared to the initial estimate in 2021 by a significant margin. I mean, I thought that number, which was provided by Heritage House Building Survey, was already very high, but it has been also inflated quite significantly. But even when we take that inflated number using the assumptions that they were used, to get from that number to the number that is available in the public documents, which is 4.3 million, there is a big distance. And then going back to Malcolm's point, at which point you draw in that range, you draw where the line is in terms of what's essential and what's not essential. And certainly we concluded that there is a safe and legal point, which has had the minimum costs. And then you add to that the net zero, and you add that the enhancement to the work environment and the accessibility, the 3 points that Tom mentioned before. And we got to 4.3 million. But the reality is we could stop or shape the strategy anyway along those lines and end up with something that's significantly lower than the 4.3 million. Or for that matter, actually, if the situation in the national park improves and the core funding increased, we might decide that we want to add additional things to that. But the approach of going into step by step and seeing what's needed in a dynamic situation based on what information we receive and based on what grants there are, that will allow or give us the flexibility to adapt to what faces us, and in my view takes the least amount of risk with taxpayers' money.
I'll go to David Hugill.
Yeah, just a quick one, Chairman. As someone just on the increasing building costs, as somebody who's building a bigger shed at the moment, not as elaborate as this one, but it's still there. And what I didn't realise, and what you see, all these machines that are buzzing around doing work, they're all now on white diesel, whereas before they were on red. Probably when this other quote was put in, they'd be running on red. And so red diesel, I bought some the other day, 77p a litre, when we know what white diesel is at the pump. So that just there's a lot of hidden costs in there that have gone up, and that is just using my experience an example. Thank you.
Okay. So I think, go on, Tom.
Yeah, so there was one point that Steve asked about Scope 3 emissions, which we didn't answer. I don't believe our procurement approach to considering the options took into account Scope 3 emissions, which is the indirect emissions from products that the contractors would purchase. But I'll defer to Tom Stevenson if I'm wrong in that respect.
It's just a non-problem with the
accounting. But we did take into account scope 1 and 2 emissions because they're part of the authority's commitment to decarbonise by 2030.
Okay. So just before we... Sorry? Oh, go on, Tom.
Just Tom's using my phone.
Just to add to Tom's point on that in terms of the procurement, so we do have an annex to our financial regulations which look at sustainable procurement considerations. They're not as developed in the fact that they're quantifying scope 3, but there are certain commitments in terms of locality, in terms of transportation emissions, in terms of sourcing of raw materials, which asks consultants to consider and the Office of Developing the Tender to consider those. So it's a work in progress. It's also one of our management plan commitments to further develop our procurement processes to be more expanded, and as part of DEFRA Group, we are looking to develop that as a national park family to make us our procurement more robust in those terms.
So we haven't done it in this scenario, then we haven't even built that in yet, we're developing it now.
Not specifically scope 3, not a quantified scope 3 emissions assessment.
Life cycle, costs, carbon, that sort of thing, materials.
No.
No, recycled steel, that sort of thing.
No.
Right.
No.
Okay.
Okay. I think it would be good for us to get on with the private paper and then come back to some of these debates, pros and cons. So, shall we move into private session? Right. Welcome back to public session. We've had a look at the private paper, and members have been able to ask questions on some of the details. So hopefully now we're better prepared to go forward and deal with the conclusions and the recommendations. Is it Tom?
Pete's just going to finish off one last little bit. Now back in public session on section 6, and I'll deal with conclusions and recommendations.
Yeah, I thought it was just worthwhile, Chair, just summarising at the end of the sort of, I guess, the private discussion, the public elements of the paper on the financial front before we move to conclusions. So just the MPV that we've talked about before, we've now discussed, which looks at the 40-year sort of life cycle options of the two options in the paper, option 1 and 2. That reserves and capital sales of property are two of the elements in the recommendations towards funding the selected option. That in the longer term, external borrowing may be required, and members should have an eye to that. But in the medium term, that internal borrowing from our own cash is the prudent option in that medium term. And then just the numbers that are in the paper are around the amount that we'd need to borrow for option 1 and 2, including contingency, which is at 1.589 million and 2.223 million for option 1 and 2 respectively. And then the costs of that from an internal borrowing, the MRP point of view, to fund that position is 40k of additional investment needed for option 1 and 56k for option 2. That's the two figures that include the contingency. And then just note that there is 22k of utility savings under option 2, which would help with that, meaning that option 2 would leave 34,000 to find from revenue budgets to fund that position. So they're the numbers that are in the paper, and I think the only other point to note is that savings requirement would commence in 28-29, because that MRP starts the year after construction completes. And I just thought it was useful just to summarise that coming back out of private.
Thanks, Pete. So where have we got to? Are we on 7 or have we got to 9?
I think we're moving up to section 9, Jim, which is conclusion and recommendations. So I think just to reiterate perhaps 3 points that I mentioned at the start and have been brought up earlier. The first is that under any scenario, significant financial investment has to be made in our property. Doing nothing is no longer an option. The second is that, as I said at the start, I appreciate this is a very consequential and strategic decision for members to make, and only members can make that decision. But we as officers are confident that the recommendation that we're putting before you is the right one. And that finally, this is about a decision that's setting the organisation up for the next 40 years, creating a proper fit-for-purpose, forward-looking working environment for a modern organisation. And only option 2 can achieve that. The recommendations are reprised as in the business case on the screen. I'll leave it there.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Short this week, we won't get to the 7, as you said. So we need to have a look at the recommendations and have some debate if members haven't any more questions to ask. And I think Tom's put it clearly to us that the recommendations are there before you. I'd just like to have a talk about the contingency. I know officers know that I'm quite strong on contingency, and I believe that the price is the price, and you shouldn't rely on contingency as something extra. I can think whichever of these options members choose, assuming they choose one. I can think of quite a lot of good things we could do with that 15% if it was there at the end of the journey. So, I don't know how you would feel about the need for contingency along the journey coming back to members. I think that we have to budget for it, but if we got into needing the contingency, I as a member would want to know why, and that to me the recommendations basically rather sort of give officers the go ahead to deliver. I don't think you might get it back again. So it's not to say, of course, contingency, you need contingency, but these are very big sums of money that we're spending on investing or considering on our own delivery processes, and the public will likely want to see that we're doing that in a responsible way. I think it seems what's really bad reputationally, is if you come out with a plan and a figure and then end up going well over it. And if that was the situation, then I think members would want to be involved in that process. So I'm just wondering whether in the recommendations I'd like to have the need for contingency to come back to members. Not to say we don't have to have it. If you think that's illegal, then shout. Steve?
Really, just to add that is what level would you set that coming back to members? What financial amount?
Being asked to take a strategic decision for the next 40 years about are we going to work here, or are we going to work somewhere else? Presumably, once we've taken that decision, then the amount of money we actually, I think we pretty well agree that we're going to borrow initially the money from ourselves because that's the most sensible and reasonable and realistic thing to do. Presumably, the amount of money that we actually borrow will depend on how accurate some of these estimates are, and it will depend on what value we get for whatever we sell. And I think, in answer to your question, Jim, I suppose the current recommendation is giving officers the right to borrow an amount which includes contingency.
That's 50% more.
Yeah. I'd welcome views of either members or officers, whether it really matters whether we approve that number or a number that you're actually going to borrow initially. I mean, I'm not too bothered whether we give the option to borrow without contingency or with contingency. If we do it with contingency, then I entirely agree with Jim that there's got to be some sort of mechanism that you come back if we're going way over the estimate without contingency. But I'll leave officers to comment on what they would prefer to do, and then I'll take a decision.
So I got some hands. I think I had Jane, and then Colin. I think. What's he going to ask? I was just trying to explore the contingency. No. I'm not making a decision, but I was just trying to explore whether it was possible for us to.
I think the contingency is about 500,000 we're talking about, is it? Yeah. Well, I think having heard all the various things I've been hearing today, I'm moving very much towards that we move to record drive. But what I'm looking at is 500,000 is a big difference in overall what we would then have to do versus, and I know it's not like you want to say we're going to lose a person or whatever, but whatever we do, minus 25,000, 35,000, 45,000, whatever it ends up being, it's a sum. It's a reduction in whether we're able to do grubs up, whether we can have more officers, whether we can have, at the end of the day, it's talking about real things towards how we look after the environment and our objectives and our purposes. So in that front, 500,000 is a lot of money. And I would really feel the problem is contingencies too often are just thought, this is the reserve I can use. I would feel quite strongly that we agree what the figure is which has been put in, because I have very high faith in the officers, and they have come and they have said, we've test stressed it, we've done this with 3 people, we've done this with 4. So in other words, they are saying to us, the X amount, sorry, because we're back in whatever, is the right amount that they could, do. And I think that is where we should accept and agree to go to. And then if we are looking that it is going to be over, they know what their overall budget is. They can take other actions to save things, or they come back to us to use some of the contingency budget. But I feel really what we don't want to be having is suddenly they've got to the top of the contingency budget because we've not kept a really tight control on this. And then we are, egg on our face, going over the contingency budget, and that would not look good as an authority for what we're meant to be doing. So my gut feeling would be to go, you can have what the costs are, because that's what you believe they are, and anything over we will deal with, but we have in our budgets got that contingency, would be my feeling on that.
Just from a sort of section 151 point of view, I think reiterating actually Jane's point a little bit, that we've got a cost there that we think it's going to be. I guess contingency is put in, it's recommended by the likes of Grant Thornton when you're financially modelling, because when you put a spade in the ground, sometimes you find things that simply otherwise couldn't be seen. It shouldn't be for anything more than that. I think also I would expect a project of this size to be financially monitored quarterly through FRASC with very clear and transparent project progress. From all the financial aspects, and actually when we present today we've got some sensitivities in the private paper, but you'll recognise from some of the numbers we've talked about, some of those will go over time as they become less commercially sensitive. So I think the contingency is also on the build cost. So coming back to that point around actually the flows from capital sales, etc., this is actually more about the actual build cost on the ground. So I think it's right that we absolutely shouldn't treat contingency as it's part of it, if you know what I mean. And then that's why in the paper we've been very clear about excluding and including contingency, to be really clear about that distinction. I think it's right that members should have involvement absolutely in when that contingency needs to be used. The only thing I'm thinking is the mechanism for that might be something to be discussed purely around being fleet of foot enough in timing of meetings, etc. If you've got something in the ground, you can't stall works on the ground for 2 months on the basis of, you probably need something where you can get to somewhat quicker decisions with members. So there might be a mechanism to be thought about, but I think we should absolutely be considering that to be contingency that's not to be used apart from in completely unforeseen emergency.
So, is there a way that we can put that into the recommendation?
Well, I mean, in very, very simple terms, under recommendation 4, rather than after second line, rather than including contingency, we just change the word including for excluding contingency.
Okay, but we need to be mindful in our budgeting process that the contingency is accessible.
My suggestion would be that it's included, because I think a build of this size, whether it be option 1 or option 2, is a considerable build, and unforeseen is and I think Colin mentioned earlier when we were in private session about that potential for unforeseen in either option, is something we should have a mind to. I think it's maybe more about how we operate in that contingency with members.
The need for contingency needs to go to members.
Yes, I think it's that. I think in consultation with members where contingency is used.
Yeah, or any variance over X.
Yeah, but I wouldn't want to approve it without, because I think it's quite important that there is. But members absolutely have to be aware if it's needed.
It needs to be there, because that's sound process, but I just don't want it, as Jane says, to be waded into without challenge or understanding, because I think we wanted to speak that. I was hoping, I was going to kind of put that into the recommendation, but the need for contingency on any of those costs. It's not just at the end, you know, it's on the costed sections. The need for contingency needs to come to members. We'll find the process for doing that properly. So, I'm really sorry, I've kind of forgotten it in my head. I had Colin, then I had Christy, and then I had Heather, and then I had Malcolm. Sorry, can you put your, we are in public session, so I'm forgetting to put the speaker on.
Right, thanks, Jim. But to be fair, Pete's just about answered it, because I was going to suggest, you know, we come back to Frask quarterly as we give an update as to where we are, how we're working, what's the chances going forward, whatever happens, whichever way we go. It is one of them things that, you know, I know you maybe need to make a decision quicker than that sometimes, which fair enough, you know, but as long as that's reported to Frask afterwards, then, you know, I don't see a problem. And we give a report, or Pete will give a report at NPA anyway. So I think contingency needs to be included, because we need that bit of flexibility one way or another. If something isn't quite going quite right, then you need that bit of flexibility to put it right as they're moving along. Because it's no good, like you say, waiting 2 months before you can put something into being while you wait for members to put their stamp on it. So yes, Chair, you know, as long as we get to know, then fine, crack on.
So, Christine?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I've really listened throughout, and I take on board the enthusiasm people have for a new building. I think in some ways it's really it's easy to be enthusiastic about something new and doing something different, because all the options are open. You know, the risks and issues are minimized in favor of kind of a rosy picture of what things might be. But nothing has actually persuaded me entirely that that same sort of vision and optimism couldn't be applied to this building, and something about the importance of the heritage this organization has here, and being close to the center of town, a point that was made earlier. So yeah, so I'm going to bank that and set that aside. Obviously, we'll come to the decisions on that shortly. I think there's, you know, other costs in terms of some of the residents have obviously made their views, felt that they're not very happy about the move for different reasons, which I don't know anything about really and haven't been closely involved with. But all those sorts of things need to be taken into account when we're thinking about opportunities and costs as well. In terms of the specific recommendations, I appreciate the point made around kind of the fiscal control and the concern about the contingency. I think on, you know, if we go down this route and we do approve this, I think on option 5, there's something there about all the borrowing requirements just being approved. And I do think we need to build in some further checks and balances, because that could include borrowing from ourselves or borrowing externally. And there's, you know, whilst we're concerned about a little bit of difference with contingency, there's a really big cost difference between borrowing from ourselves and borrowing externally. So I think we need to be more rigorous in terms of the checks and balances. I mean, obviously officers are going to do their best thing, and we've got lots of faith, but I don't think we can just sign a blank check for, you know, many millions of pounds without any recourse. So let's build something in there about a limit on that, or about approving internal borrowing but not external, or how that's going to work.
If I can, Jim, I think the paper makes it quite clear that external borrowing is something in the future that will probably be required, and we ought to have an eye to that. It does say in the paper that I would come back to committee and members with that at any point at which external borrowing might be required. So that is in the paper. So that could be added to the recommendation number 5. So it's in the paper, but not the recommendation. So that could be added to say that I'm obliged to come back to committee for approval to externally borrow at the point at which should that become needed.
George?
I'm finding it difficult to talk about contingencies when I think about it. We haven't made a decision about whether we're looking at a new build or staying here. So therefore, you can't put the two together as I can see it. Because if we're looking at a new, I take the point, if we start to carry out work and we found, you know, we found other things going on. But if we're going on to a new site, I mean, quite frankly, the contingency should be with the contractor. We've got to do the due diligence to make sure if we do go to a new site that whatever's in the contract, that the contractors they pick up that we don't have to worry about that. If we get this signed up properly, that's what they're there for. We agree a price with them. I mean, we should know, they've had a survey if there's anything underneath the land, there's already some premises on there. So I'm finding it difficult to relate the fact contingent from why do we need it if it's a new build or if we stay here. So I think there's two different decisions we're making here. And I think if we decide to go with a new build, we shouldn't have to worry too much. The people who are doing the work should be the ones. Okay, I accept that money we might not get if we weren't onto a new site, how much we're going to get for this property. It might not be what we what we thought, or it might be more. But that is one issue. But I suggest if it is on a new build, the responsibility, providing we do all the legal stuff properly, lies with the developer and not with us. But I'll leave that there. I'm finding it difficult to evaluate the two in one. Thank you. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Good point. Malcolm.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, first of all, just on the contingency matter, I'm perfectly relaxed now with the recommendation as it is to keep contingency in. The point in private session that Colin made, that there's probably a greater risk of the contingency being used if we stay here than in a new build is a reasonable one. But so keep contingency in, because you'll be coming to us in any case about what you're borrowing and when. When I say us, then FRASC has a role. It has a fairly long agenda usually. There are other ways of doing that. I mean, FRASC will definitely need to keep a check of, regularly what's going on. Presumably there's a working party there still, if necessary, maybe not the best way. There's clearly chair's approval that you can go to for urgent things. I think we've got the right mechanisms in place, one way or another, for members to keep a close check, as close a check as the officers would like us to have, which is clearly being with us. I think we've got the mechanisms there. So I'm relaxed about contingency staying in. Yeah. In terms of the decision, as I said previously, it's a strategic decision about, do we stay here or do we go? And part of it is to do with money. And although the big numbers, they're fairly similar sorts of numbers, with lots of uncertainty in them. I quoted estimates of, what this place is worth, what the land is worth, etc., etc. There's the staff element, which is what's the best environment for our staff to work in for the next 40 years, given what you could in the long term do with this building and the new building. And so my assessment of that is very much, it seems that the way of working, as you explained it, is this open plan. I agree it's not perfect, no, none of them are perfect. It seems to me that a new building would assist staff in a better way than this amended building. I must say, when I first started listening to all of this 3 or 4 years ago, I like old buildings. I would love this authority to do up this old building. But then you say, what's the best use over the next 40 years for this building?
So erring towards vehicle drive with contingency available. George.
Thank you. I believe that in front of us is a false choice. It is not between option A, option 1 and option 2. The choice we have today is between investing to get us to safe and legal which I'm not going to mention the figure, but it was discussed in the private session. There is a significant amount of money that we can use to support the community, to make our, in light of the in light of the Langdale Moor wildfires, a lot of amount of money we can use to support the community, the environmental aspect that we are trying to achieve. We can make our public right-of-ways more accessible. There are so many things that we can achieve more value for money if we go with the minimum investment, minimum essential investment, rather than one of those two options that are presented in front of us. And also, it's important that we, as a National Park Authority, focus on our key purposes rather than looking at ourselves and trying to find new, modern, 21st century posh offices that I don't believe will improve the productivity of the employees. There is no actual problem with the work environment here that actually we have any evidence to talk about. The work of the employees and the staff has been fantastic over the years. This is a problem that we have created to justify moving to Rickle Draft, but the reality is the team, the employees of the National Park Authority have been exemplar in terms of their work, in terms of their efficiency, in terms of their productivity. And we are trying to come up with a problem to justify a solution that's not needed. There is a huge amount of money that is better used to invest in the community or to invest in our purposes rather than in this posh, luxurious building that's not going to serve us, serve our purposes. It's going to put this £4 million is going to put the authority at a big financial risk. We don't know what we don't know. There are significant unknowns there. It could potentially bankrupt the authority in the future. You don't know what we are going into. So I would be very cautious before we go and approve this plan. And obviously, I would be voting against both those options and suggesting that we should instead invest in the minimum amount needed to keep the authorities, to keep these headquarters safe and legal, and have the rest of the money invest in our purposes so that we can deliver on what we set up to and achieve better value for money.
Thank you, George. I know that is consistent with the view that you've taken along this journey, and I thank you for it. Steve?
George, I think I'm going to take an entirely different position to you. I think this is an investment for truth. I think this is an investment for true sustainable development for the future. I think what we're doing here is investing into the future of the park. The heritage point, actually, I thought was really interesting when you mentioned the site in Helmsley, but I think I'm framing this around the entire park. I think the value of us having an offices that are good for the staff, that add this retention for the staff, help us deal with our net zero commitments, which, by the way, George, are safe and legal commitments. Net zero is becoming a legal commitment. I'm a bit concerned about your framing of safe and legal is literally, that's just the bare minimum work. And I think we need to do a little bit more on focusing on how we think grow was used the right word. I would say thrive actually is a better word for us. I look at the contingency in particular. I think that's a really interesting point. I like the framing of that, setting a benchmark on that. But you mentioned your uncertainty. We know on the sustainable development side, we know what's coming. We know there's going to be higher impacts. We know we've got to do better. This building, I think, has reached its limitations. And I think the problem we're going to have in 10 years' time, we're going to have to come back to the table again and have to do it all again. So I think this decision today is very strategically minded to make sure that we're securing the future of the staff for the next 40 years. So I'll be voting for Rickle.
Thanks. I go to John Ritchie, and then I think we just need to sort of clarify a proposal so we can debate that formally to a conclusion. John?
I'm happy if we're going to move on after this. I'm happy to wait until we take votes, so to speak.
Is that what you're just saying?
What I was going to say, I'm happy with, I think all the reasons have been clearly laid out before us, and I would move that we formally adopt all the recommendations. I'm happy with the contingency part of it, but if that needs to be amended in some way, then I'm happy for that to happen as well.
So let's put this into a recommendation. What you, I think Malcolm spoke, if we put forward that option 2 is that the move to Nickel Drive, and that is what the obviously. I keep doing that. So with those tweaks into the recommendation to go to option 2 with the contingency qualified by those points. Is that okay, John?
Yeah, I was just wondering whether you wanted me to try and clarify some wording, because I think we're talking here about recommendation 4 and recommendation 5. So I think on this and what you've said there, Chair, and what I've heard from some members, if not all, in relation to contingency, is that the wording of recommendation 4 remains as is, but that we should add that officers will report quarterly to FRASC on progress, and that significant variances over and above the bill cost estimates will be reported and approved by members. If you wanted to put a number on that, I'd recommend variances of 50,000, but we can specify that in the as an addition to recommendation 4, if that makes sense. And then in terms of recommendation 5, I've noted again an additional sentence at the end of recommendation 5, which is that officers will revert to either National Park Authority or FRASC should external borrowing be required for a decision.
Sorry, Jim, can I just ask one question? Because Heather brought up a very important point, and I know that she was very involved in the building of James Cook Hospital, and therefore I wanted to understand why our contractors need a contingency and why her contractors, it was their responsibility. I just want to understand that, if that would be okay, please.
Well, I think that no, I think the point is that we still want to say the fact is that because we're borrowing from ourselves initially, then the need for the contingency is, as Malcolm pointed out, how much extra we borrow. But I still think the cost of the cost, that the points about getting quotes and contractors is a valid one, and I think that for due diligence we need to have contingency available, but I don't think we should just automatically spend it without members coming back to that. And so I think I'd like to be a little bit stronger than that.
Sorry, Jim, that didn't answer my question. Didn't answer my question.
Let me just finish making this point. Okay. In Tom's summing up, I think on 4, I would like the need for the use of contingency over the estimated cost to come before members. So, and that means that money is it's still there. It's just we don't draw it down, and it's not as though you haven't spent it until you've needed it, have you? Because it's just available.
Sorry, Jim, that wasn't my question.
Okay, well, I was just Tricky
Yeah,
lot.
it's a bit. That's right. Another question.
First of all, I'm just addressing Tom's summing up to say that on 4, I'd like to be a little bit stronger on contingency, just to say that the need for contingency will come to members. And we can make a process for that being workable. It's not going to hold us up.
That wasn't my question. What my question was, I wanted to understand, but because I completely agree with you on contingency, but that was not my question. My question was, I wanted to understand why Heather's one, the contractors had to pay any overspend, and why our one is we put in a contingency. So that I just wanted to understand that, not to make any comments. I wasn't making any comments on the contingency. I wanted to understand that.
Is it worth me coming back on this?
Yes.
Okay, so the total build cost, we pulled out, for want of a better word, almost like under the line of the contractor's global cost of some items that we would put, like buying furniture, some costs like stone wall building, planting trees. Because if you leave those costs under the contractor's cost, and it's literally a turnkey, that's the difference. Potentially, Heather's talking about a turnkey, literally everything is done when you turn up. In order to save costs, because every time a builder does something, they're adding 24% to the cost. So we prudently took out a number of those costs, put them under the line, and those costs are still to be agreed. So we know what we think they are. There have been several tenders for furniture, but until we actually get to that point, so it's not 100% turnkey contracts, and that might be the difference.
Come on, Heather.
Yeah, okay, accept that. But I'd equally, obviously, we're not just talking about costs. We're talking about, input. I mean, if, say, when the sale of the vicarage, okay? I'm not quite sure, whether the members should be part of that, but I don't want to reiterate, but going back, it took an awful long time to sell the property next door, and there was variation cost. I mean, where would members, or would the FRAS committee come into that, or will the officers make a decision about, when we're selling this? It's an asset. It's part of what we will be borrowing against, actually. But anyway, I wonder where that.
I think the recommendation illustrates that it's sort of recommended for officers to be able to do the time of marketing, but we'd come back with the end results from members.
To that, because
for asset sales.
We could get more, so we probably won't have to. Thank you. Just to make that clear, so it won't come back here to FRAS or straight way through. Thank you. That's clarification. Thank you.
Steve?
Yeah, I mean, it's only brief, but I think the contingency costs around how we procure our services, how we procure our products, and everything else will be built into the contracts. But Keckskill comes to mind for North Yorkshire Council, and the lack of contingency cost on Keckskill has cost that council millions. So I think it's prudent to have this cost in place. It's not necessary for contractors to charge more money because their services have gone up, because they'll be signed and up to the deal. I think it's more about, let's make sure we don't get caught out the same as North Yorkshire Council did.
John McHugh. I've got you, David.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I've been writing a lot of notes. Looking broadly, we're not a big corporate body like Amazon who are devoted to commercial growth. We're a public body which preserves and develops the national landscape of a national park. I think the construction of a large modern building doesn't match up to this aim. Also, I can't believe the dilapidation of the old vicarage here is irreversible. It can't be beyond the capabilities of modern building maintenance to refresh the old vicarage. And last thing I've written down here, in respect of staff working practices, administration certainly needs good office space, but officers, rangers, members are just as much engaged out there in the landscape, finding out what's going on.
Thanks for those words of wisdom. David Jeffels.
Just a brief comment, Mr. Chairman. I was persuaded, having made the site visit 3 or 4 years ago, of the need to provide much better working facilities for our staff than the old vicarage was able to provide. Nothing has changed my mind, and I'm pleased that we've had word today about the safeguards that are being put in place so far as the contingency is concerned. I think we have to look many years ahead as to what is going to be a benefit to the staff and to the National Park Authority as such, and I have no reservation at all in supporting the move to Record Drive.
Would you second that then?
I will do so, yes.
So I'll move that from the chair to get to the formality of the debate. That we take up option 2 with the caveats on the recommendations that we've made. If that's unworkable, I'm sure it'll come back to us. But I'd rather have it like that than wave it away forever. So I can move that from the chair for the sake of debate. David Jeffels can second that. Well, not unless it's asked for. I'll take Malcolm. I'll make a few comments of my own, and then we'll see where we get to.
If you're going to go through with our recommendations, I was just going to say the 5 there are, construction, relocation. Secondly, approve the old vicarage. Thirdly, delegate to officers various things. Fourthly, work should be carried out, including contingency. Tom added a bit to that. And the 5th is approve the allocation of funds as laid out. Can you just comment on the allocation of funds in response to George? We're not taking a decision to borrow money and then decide how we're going to spend it. This extra 2 million isn't an extra 2 million we're going to suddenly spend. We will borrow what is necessary for this particular development. We're not borrowing more money to do other wonderful things.
It could have been used otherwise.
Hang on, don't interrupt, George. And so 5 is approve the allocation of funds as laid out. And we discussed previously the way in which officers would keep members informed, and I am perfectly relaxed about the ways in which the officers are going to keep us informed about the development. So I would move all 5 recommendations with those changes. But please don't surprise yourself if you disagree with it.
It's been done. Yes. It's been done. That's from the chair and seconded by David. Yeah. And the point is that should we go to public borrowing, that would be a decision for members. Yeah. So I think we've got those in the recommendations. Just a few thoughts of my own, because this has been a really difficult journey for us. And the first, my first sentiment is always, like George, that we are a public authority. We're there to do stuff that the public notices doing. We're a national asset, as well as being doing local work for the good. And I really don't want our focus to be on our office. Our office is a means to an end. Our office is the way that we get out there and deliver that stuff. And that's absolutely 100% where I start. But there's a slight difference between us as board members and our paid service. And there's a bit of a firewall there. We don't come into the office as members every day and do our day's work. We're here to give strategic direction, to take responsibility collectively, and to enable that good stuff to be done through the 130 or so staff that I saw giving me a bit of a hard time at the meeting before Christmas, which is great. And so it's not about what I personally want to do for the work. what I really do want to do is to make sure that we deliver a good value for the public. And it is a concern to me, but Tom says to us, as our head of paid service, that doing nothing isn't an option. And we, as the responsible group for the staff, have to take heed of that. We can't just ignore it and say, no, sorry, actually, we think you want something else. They're telling us what they want. They're giving us an option which will cost us 33 or 43,000 pounds a year. And when you add the cost of our staff and the cost of our office and the cost of delivery over 40 years, those are very manageable costs. And David, who's the only person who's been here longer than me, hasn't seen any investment much in this building, as I have. We haven't invested. And so expectation has been raised, a continuous line of decisions has been made towards achieving this. And I think, we owe it to our staff, if it's affordable and if we can manage the risk, to do what they suggest and what they're recommending. And no value has been put on the value that we give to our staff, and quite rightly so, because I don't think it is a monetary value. But I'm absolutely sure that those staff will be looking at us on the screen, or as the member of the public is in the back, and saying, what do you think of us? This is our jobs that you're talking about. And so, although my instinct is I didn't really want to move, I don't want to have to spend money that isn't for the public. When I really look myself in the mirror, this is the job that we're here to do, and this is what we need to do, and that I'm going to support it. But I have to say that hasn't come easily from me, and I think officers who have been on the journey with us will vouch for that. So that's where I stand. I don't know if there's anybody else wants to speak, or we could just take a vote. Okay, we'll. Yeah, Jane.
Sorry, a silly question. In the budget that you said, all the bits that you've saved, because obviously explaining to why it's a different contract to Heather's, are they included in your budget?
They are. They are effectively sort of provisional, but they just haven't been tested in today's value.
But they're in the excluded contingency budget, so I don't say any words.
Yes.
Lovely.
Yeah. They are. Yeah, we're not double adding. Yeah,
that's all I needed. Yeah. So in other words, they weren't in your contingency.
No.
That's what I wanted to know, because otherwise we weren't doing something fair in what we were putting into the recommendations, if that was the case. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, so there's just one thing that I was going to add before George comes in again. That I think, given the proposal is on the table, is that we're to move. We'll see if that's supported or not. But that rather negates the question of waiting or doing little doesn't address that issue for me, because either we need to work on being fit for purpose in this building with those recommendations, or we need to have a new building. And it's an annual cost to me, for 33 or 43,000 a year, we get to start that journey, or we could spend a chunk of money and wait for another 5 years for a reason which hasn't yet appeared. So, if we were worried that the authority was going to be wound up, national parks were going to be done away with, something like that, then that would be a reason, I think, to be cautious. But if you split it down to an annual cost, we can do this, and the sooner we start, the sooner we'll get there, and the sooner we'll get back to doing what we should be doing out there, instead of arguing about our office, which is something which concerns me somewhat. So, hand over to you, George.
Steve and Malcolm referred to my comments just to set the record straight. I mean, the extra amount of money that Malcolm mentioned could have been used in another way. And the point that Steve mentioned about the safe and legal, you're absolutely right. The additional amount of money could be used for environmental purposes, not the initial one, but the extra one that we would be saving. But I will leave it there. Just wanted to set the record correct, because comments were made about the remarks I made earlier.
Oh, thanks, George. And I have to say, by tradition, our work at the authority here is that we kind of address everybody instead of individuals. It's served us well over time, and so, but no harm done.
No.
Yeah. So we've got the recommendation. It was I think moved from the chair and seconded by David. Is everybody clear on that?
Yeah.
Well, do you want to read it? If anybody's not clear, say it. If they are clear.
I think you're voting on recommendations 1 to 5 with the amendments that I referred to earlier to recommendation 4 and recommendation 5.
Yeah, which was to give members control of contingency.
And yes, I've got some additional words to that effect. Yeah.
Problem with the exact detail of that, I'm sure we can sort it out. So all those in favour of that proposal, please show. Can you have a count, Tom?
Yeah, I can.
All those against? Any abstentions? No. So that is approved as recommended, and it's been quite a long session. There are some sandwiches.
They'll be dried up by now.
So, just turning back to the agenda. I think item 9 is such other business as the chair should wish to discuss it, and the chair's discussed far more than he wished to in the first place.